The ninth step towards self realization suggested by Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi is silence. On the whole, the Maharishi did not approve of wars of silence if the mind is controlled. Useless speech will be avoided, but abjuring speech will not quieten the mind. The effect cannot produce the cause. Devotee asked, is not a vow of silence helpful? Bhagwan said, a vow is only a vow. It may help meditation to some extent, but what is the use of keeping the mouth shut and letting the mind run right? If the mind is engaged in meditation, what need is there for speech? Nothing is as good as meditation. What is the use of a vow of silence if one is engrossed in activity? The 10th step towards self realization is diet. Regulation of diet, restricting it to sattvic food taken in moderate quantities, is the best of all rules of conduct and the most conducive to the development of sattvic pure qualities of mind. These in turn help one in the practice of self inquiry. It is within our power to adopt a simple and nutritious diet and with earnest and incessant endeavor to eradicate the ego, the cause of all misery, by stopping all mental activity born of the ego. Can obsessing thoughts arise without the ego, or can there be illusion apart from such thoughts? Devotee asked, are there any aids to concentration and casting off distractions? Bhagwan said, physically, the digestive and other organs are to be kept free from irritation. Therefore, food is regulated both in quantity and quality. Non irritants are eaten, avoiding chilies, excess of salt, onions, wine, opium, and so on. Avoid constipation, drowsiness, and excitement, and all foods which induce them. Mentally take interest in one thing and fix the mind on it. Let that interest be self absorbing to the exclusion of everything else. This is dispassion, vairagya, and concentration. Mrs. Pygott returned from Madras for a further visit and asked questions concerning diet. Mrs. P. What diet is suitable for a person engaged in spiritual practice? Bhagwan said, sattvic food in moderate quantities. Mrs. P. What food is sattvic? Bhagwan said, bread, fruit, vegetables, milk, and such things. Mrs. P. Some people in the north eat fish. Is that permissible? Mrs. P. We Europeans are accustomed to a particular diet, and change of diet affects the health and weakness the mind. Is not it necessary to keep up physical health? Bhagwan said, quite necessary. The weaker the body, the stronger the mind grows. Mrs. P. In the absence of our usual diet, our health suffers and the mind loses its strength. Bhagwan said, what do you mean by strength of mind? Mrs. P. The power to eliminate worldly attachment. Bhagwan said, the quality of one's food influences the mind. The mind feeds on the food consumed. Mrs. P. Really? But how can Europeans accommodate themselves to sattvic food? Bhagwan said, turning to Mrs. Evans Vantage, you have been taking our food. Does it inconvenience you at all? EV, EW, no, because I am accustomed to it. Bhagwan said, custom is only an adjustment to environment. It is the mind that matters. The fact is that the mind has been trained to find certain food good and palatable. The necessary food value is obtainable in vegetarian as well as non-vegetarian food. Only the mind desires the sort of food that it is used to and which is it considers palatable. Mrs. P. Do these restrictions apply to the realized man also? Bhagwan said he is stabilized and not influenced by the food he takes. Devotee asked, can fasting help towards realization? Bhagwan said, yes, but it is only a temporary help. It is mental fasting that is the real aid. Fasting is not an end in itself. There must be spiritual development. At the same time, absolute fasting weakens the mind too and leaves you without sufficient strength for the spiritual quest. Therefore, eat in moderation and continue the quest. Devotee asked, they say that 10 days after breaking a month's fast, the mind becomes pure and steady and remains so forever. Bhagwan said, yes, but only if the spiritual quest has been kept up right through the fast. The 11th step towards self realization is celibacy. It is normal in India that all those who do not renounce the world to become sadhus marry. Bhagwan always insisted that brahmacharya is living constantly in Brahm. He did not encourage formal adoption of the saffron garb, external sannyasa. He neither enjoined nor discouraged celibacy, though occasionally he did evince interest in births and marriages among the devotees. The 12th step towards self realization is bhakti. We come to know Bhakti Marga, the path of love and devotion, worship and surrender. This is usually considered the very atheist of self inquiry, since it is based on the presumption of duality of worshipper and worshipped, lover and beloved, whereas self inquiry presumes non duality. Therefore, theorists are apt to pressure that if one is based on truth, the outer must be based on error, and in expounding one, they only often condemn the other. Bhagwan not only recognized both these paths but guided his followers on them both. He often said, there are two ways, ask yourself, who am I, or surrender. Many of his followers choose the latter way. Devotee asked, what is unconditional surrender? Bhagwan said, if one surrenders completely, there will be no one left to ask questions or to be considered. Either the thoughts are eliminated by holding on to the root thought I, or one surrenders unconditionally to the higher power. These are the only two ways to realization. Bhagwan said, there are only two ways to conquer destiny or to be independent of it. One is to inquire whose this destiny is, and to discover that only the ego is bound by it and not the self, and that the ego is non existent. The other way is to kill the ego by completely surrendering to the Lord, realizing one's helplessness and saying all the time, not I, but thou, O Lord, giving up all sense of I and mine and leaving it to the Lord to do what He likes with you. Surrender can never be regarded as complete as long as the devotee wants this or that from the Lord. True surrender is the love of God for the sake of love and nothing else, not even for the sake of salvation. In other words, complete effacement of the ego is necessary to conquer destiny. Whether you achieve this effacement through self inquiry or through bhakti marg, the spark of spiritual knowledge, jnana, will consume all creation like mountain heap of cotton. Since all the countless worlds are built upon the weak or non existent foundations of the ego, they all disintegrate when the atom bomb of knowledge falls on them. All talk of surrender is like stealing sugar from a sugar image of Ganesha and then offering it to the same Ganesha. You say that you offer up your body and soul and all your possessions to God, but were they yours to offer? At best, you can say, I wrongly imagined till now that all these which are yours were mine. Now I realize that they are yours, and I shall no longer act as though they were mine. And this knowledge that there is nothing but God or the self, that I and mine do not exist, and that only the self exists, is Gyan. It is enough that one surrenders oneself. Surrender is giving oneself up to the original cause of one's being. Do not delude yourself by imagining this source to be some God outside you. One source is within oneself. Give yourself up to it. That means that you should seek the source and merge in it. Because you imagine yourself to be out of it, you raise the question, where is the source? Some content that just as a sugar cannot taste its own sweetness, or there must be someone to taste and enjoy it, so an individual cannot both be the supreme and also enjoy the bliss of the state. Therefore, the individuality must be maintained separate from the Godhead in order to make enjoyment possible. But is God insentient like sugar? How can one surrender oneself and yet retain one's individuality for supreme enjoyment? Furthermore, they also say that the soul, on reaching the divine region and remaining there, serve the Supreme Being. Can the sound of the word service deceive the God? Does he not know? Is he waiting for these people's services? Would he not, pure consciousness, ask in turn, who are you apart from me that presumes to serve me? If, on the other hand, you merge in the self, there will be no individuality left. You will become the source itself. In that case, what is surrender? Who is to surrender and to whom? This constitutes devotion, wisdom, and self inquiry. Among the Vaishnavis too, Saint Namalvar says, I was a maze clinging to I and mine. I wandered without knowing myself. On realizing myself, I understand that I myself am you, and that mine, that is my possessions, is only yours. Thus, you see, devotion is nothing more than knowing oneself. The school of qualified monism also admits it. Still adhering to their traditional doctrine, they persist in affirming that individuals are a part of Supreme, his limbs as it were. Their traditional doctrine says also that the individual soul should be made pure and then surrendered to the Supreme. Then the ego is lost and one goes to the region of Vishnu after death. Then finally there is the enjoyment of the Supreme or the infinite. To say that one is apart from the primal source is itself a pretension. To add that one divested of the ego becomes pure and yet remains individuality only to enjoy or serve the Supreme is a deceitful stratagem. But duplicity, this is first to appropriate what is really his and then pretend to experience to serve him. Is not all this known to him? As often as one tries to surrender, the ego raises its head and one has to try to suppress it. Surrender is not an easy thing. Killing the ego is not an easy thing. It is only when God Himself, by His grace, draws the mind inward and complete surrender can be achieved. Dr. Syed asked Bhagwan, doesn't total or complete surrender imply that even desire for liberation of God should be given up? Bhagwan said, complete surrender does imply that you should have no desire of your own, that God's will alone is your will, and you have no will of your own. Dr. S. Now that I am satisfied on that point, I want to know what are the steps by which I can achieve surrender. Bhagwan said there are two ways. One is looking into the source of the I and merging into that source. The other is feeling I am helpless by myself God alone is all powerful, and except for throwing myself completely on Him, there is no other means to safety for me, and thus gradually developing the conviction that God alone exists and the ego doesn't count. Both methods lead to the same goal. Complete surrender is another name for jnana or liberation. Devotee said, I find surrender impossible. Bhagwan said, complete surrender is impossible in the beginning, but partial surrender is possible for all. In course of time, that will lead to complete surrender. The state will be called realization is simply being oneself, not knowing anything or becoming anything. If one has realized, then he is that which alone is and which alone has always been. He cannot describe that state, he can only be that. Of course, we talk loosely or self realization for want of a better term, but how is one to realize or make real that which alone is real? What we all are doing is realizing or regarding as real that which is unreal. This habit has to given up. All spiritual effort under all systems is directed only to this end. When we give up regarding the unreal as real, then reality alone will remain and we shall be that. The Swami replied, this exposition is all right in the framework of non-duality, but there are other schools which do not insist on the disappearance of the triad of knower, knowledge and the known as the condition of self-realization. There are schools which believe in the existence of two and even three eternal entities. There is the Bhakta, for instance, in order that he may worship, there must be a God. Bhagwan said, whoever object to his having a separate God to worship, so long as he needs one, through devotion he develops until he comes to feel that God alone exists and that he himself doesn't count. He comes to a stage when he says, not I but thou, not my will but thine. But then that stage is reached, which is called complete surrender in Bhakti Marga. One finds that effacement of the ego is the attainment of the self. We need not quarrel whether there are two entities or more or only one. Even according to dualists and according to Bhakti Marga, complete surrender is necessary. Do that first and then see for yourself whether the one self alone exists or whether there are two or more. Bhagwan further added, whatever may be said to suit the different capacities of different men, the truth is that the state of self realization must be beyond the triad of knower, knowledge and known. The self is the self, that is all that can be said of it. The Swami then asked whether a jnani could retain his body after attaining self realization. He added, it is said that the impact of self realization is so forceful that the weak physical body cannot bear it for more than 21 days at the longest. Bhagwan replied, what is your idea of a jnani? Is he the body or something different? If he is something apart from the body, how can he be affected by the body? Books speak of different kinds of liberation, Videha Mukti without body and Jivan Mukti with body. There may be different stages on the path, but there are no degrees of liberation. Devotee asked, love postulates duality. How can the self be the object of love? Bhagwan said, love is not different from the self. Love of an object is a lover is of a lower type and cannot endure, whereas the self is love. God is love. A visitor said to Bhagwan, please prescribe various rituals and forms of worship, and people are told that it is a sin not to observe them. Is there any need for such ritual and ceremonial worship? Bhagwan said, yes, such worship is also necessary. It may not help you, but that doesn't mean that it is necessary for no one and is no good at all. What is necessary for the infant is not necessary for the graduate, but even the graduate has to make use of the alphabet he learnt in the infant class. He knows its full use and significance. Devotee asked, "What are the steps of practical training?" Bhagwan said, "It depends on the qualifications and nature of the seeker." Devotee asked, "I worship an idol." Bhagwan said, "Go on doing it. Doing so, it leads to concentration of mind. Get one pointed, all will come right in the end. People think that liberation, moksha, is somewhere outside them to be sought for. They are wrong. It is only knowing the self in you. Concentrate and you will get it. It is your mind that is the cycle of births and deaths, sanskara. Devotee asked, "My mind is very unsteady. What should I do?" Bhagwan said, "Fix your attention on the single thing and try to hold on it. Everything will come right." Devotee asked, "I find concentration difficult." Bhagwan said, "Keep on practicing and your concentration will come to be an easy as breathing. That will be the crown of your achievement." Devotee asked, "A vision of God is something glorious." Bhagwan said, "A vision of God is only a vision of the self objectified as the God of your particular faith. What you have to do is to know the self." Bhagwan was often heard to say, "To know God is to love God." Therefore, the paths of jnana and bhakti, knowledge and devotion, come to the same. Raman Maharishi's views on japa. Japa, that is the use of incantations and invocations of a divine name, is one of the most widely practiced technique of spiritual training. It has particular affinity with the bhakti path of love and devotion. The person who practiced any incantations had been duly authorized to do so by a qualified guru. He himself occasionally authorized the use of invocations, but very seldom. The point is to keep out all other thoughts except the one thought of Om or Ram or God. All incantations and invocations help to do that. Devotee said, "When I invoke the divine name for an hour or more, I fall into a state like sleep. On waking up, I recollect that my invocation has been interrupted, so I try again." Bhagwan said, "Like sleep, that is right. It is the natural state, but because you now identify yourself with the ego, you look upon the natural state as something which interrupts your work. So you must have the experience, repeat it until you realize that it is your natural state. You will then find that the invocation is extraneous, but still it will go on automatically. Your present doubt is due to false identification of yourself with the mind that makes the invocation. Invocation really means clinging to one thought to the exclusion of all others. That is the purpose of it. It leads to absorption, which ends in self realization or jnana." Devotee asked, "How should I practice invocation?" Bhagwan said, "One should not use the name of God mechanically and superficially without a feeling of devotion. When one uses the name of God, one should call on Him with yearning and unreservedly surrender oneself to Him. Only after such surrender is the name of God constantly with you." Devotee asked, "My practice has been continuous invocation of the names of God while breathing in and of the names of Sai Baba while breathing out. Simultaneously with this, I see the form of Baba always. Even in Bhagwan, I see Baba. The external appearances are also much alike. Bhagwan is thin. Baba was a little stout. Should I continue this method or change it? Something within tells me that if I stick to name and form, I shall never get beyond them, but I cannot understand what further to do if I gave them up. Will Bhagwan please enlighten me? Bhagwan said, you may continue with your present method. When the japa becomes continuous, all other thoughts cease and one is in one's real nature, which is invocation or absorption. We turn our minds outward to things of the world and are therefore not aware that our real nature is always invocation. When by conscious effort or invocation or meditation, as we call it, we prevent our minds from thinking of others' things, then what remains is our real nature, which is invocation. So long as you think you are name and form, you cannot escape name and form in invocation. When you realize that you are not name and form will drop of themselves. No other effort is necessary. Invocation or meditation will lead to it naturally and as a matter of course. Invocation, which is now regarded as the means, will then be found to be the goal. There is no difference between God and His name. Devotee asked, is not mental invocation better than oral? Bhagwan said, oral incantation consists of sounds. The sounds arise from thought, for one must think before one expresses one's thought in words. The thoughts from the mind, therefore, mental invocation is better than oral. Devotee asked, should not we contemplate the invocation and repeat it orally also? Bhagwan said, when the invocation becomes mental, where is the need for sound? On becoming mental, it becomes contemplation. Meditation, contemplation, and mental invocation are the same. When thoughts cease to be promiscuous and one thought persists to the exclusion of all others, it is said to be contemplation. The object of invocation or meditation is to exclude varied thoughts and confine oneself to one thought. Then that thought too vanishes into its source, which is pure consciousness or the self. The mind first engages in invocation and then sinks into its own source. This is certain. Worship, incantations, and meditation are performed respectively with the body, the voice, and the mind, and in this they are of ascending order of value. One can regard this eightfold universe as a manifestation of God, and whatever worship is performed in it is excellent as worship of God. The repetition aloud of His name is better than praise. Better still is its faint murmur, but the best is repetition with the mind, and that is meditation above referred to. Better than such broken thoughts, meditation is its steady and continuous flow, like the flow of oil or of a perennial stream. Bhagwan Sri Raman Maharishi's view on Karma Marga. Devotee asked Swamiji, how can the grip of the ego be loosened? Bhagwan said, by not adding new vasanas, innate tendencies to it. Devotee asked, how does activity help? Will it not add to the already heavy load that has to be removed? Bhagwan said, actions performed with no thought of the ego purify the mind and help to fix it in meditation. Devotee asked, but suppose one were to meditate incessantly without activity? Bhagwan said, try and see, your innate tendencies will not let you. Meditation dhyana comes only step by step with the weakening of innate tendencies by the grace of the Guru. Examinations of the ephemeral nature of external things lead to dispassion, vairagya. Hence, inquiry is the first and most important step. When it becomes automatic, it results in indifference to wealth, fame, ease, pleasure, and so on. The I thought is traced to the source of the I in the heart, which is the final goal. However, if the aspirant is temperamentally unsuited for self inquiry, he must develop devotion. It may be to God or Guru or mankind in general, or ethical laws, or even in ideal of beauty. As any of these take possession of him, other attachments grow weaker and dispassion develops. Attachment to the object of devotion grows until it dominates him completely, and with it grows concentration, ekagrata, with or without visions and direct aids. If neither inquiry nor devotion appeals to him, he can gain tranquility by breath control. This is the way of yoga. If a man's life is in danger, all his interest centers round the one point of saving it. If the breath is held, the mind cannot afford to jump out at its beloved outer objects, and it doesn't do so. Therefore, there is peace of mind as long as the breath is held. Since all one's attention is concentrated on the breath, other interests are abandoned. Then also any passion results in irregular breathing. A paroxysm of joy is in fact as painful as one of grief, and both result in disturbed breathing. Real peace is happiness, and pleasures do not produce happiness. If the aspirant is unsuited to the first two methods by temperament and to the third on account of age or health, he must try Kram Marga, the path of good deeds and social service. His nobler instincts are thus developed, and he derives personal happiness from his actions. His ego becomes less assertive, and its good side is enabled to develop. He thus, in course of time, comes to be suited for one of the three former paths, or his intuition may be developed by Karma Marga alone. Hari Om Tat Sat.